So our project was on the Wolf of Wall Street. Um, a little brief overview in this presentation, we will cover what the movie's about, inaccuracies in the movie, the history behind pump and dump schemes, Freeman's stakeholder theory, how democracy was violated, and utilitarianism, and a little brief conclusion at the end. In this group, there is Julian, Ivy, and Jacob. So this movie is an adaptation of a true story about the real-life Jordan Belfort, who was known as the Wolf of Wall Street. A mixture of drugs, alcohol, and partying made up most of his quote-unquote success, along with his wit and charm. He ran a pump and dump scheme that involved selling big stocks to gain trust from investors and then selling them as penny stocks. This is unethical because his goal was to profit, and he did not care what would happen to his investors.
So the movie begins with Jordan Belfort, the main protagonist, and his career on Wall Street. At the age of 22, he has a meeting with a higher up at the firm he's working with and gets a taste of high living during a lunch meeting. This firm eventually goes under, and Belfort downscales and begins working with a smaller firm, working with pink sheets, aka penny stocks. This is where one of the more important scenes of the movie occurs, where Belfort uses his higher up Wall Street experience to teach the people at this new firm how to sell stocks and in turn scam people who are interested in buying stocks. Belfort begins to build up his own investment firm based on the penny stocks, which have an incredibly high commission rate of 50%. And in turn, his wealth in the movie is represented as being entirely based on scamming buyers and lying about the companies in which they're investing. The company begins to crumble once the FBI catches wind of Stratton Oakmont's business scheme, and eventually Belfort is sentenced to prison and is banned from stock brokerage.
So comparing the movie to what happened in real life, there were several inaccuracies. The central issue that the movie focused on was Belfort and Stratton Oakmont's pump and dump scheme, which scammed their clients and investors out of money by getting them to invest into the penny stocks at a high price and then only making profit for themselves. And in the movie, it showed that all of those deals were pretty much scams. However, in real life, Belfort claimed that only 95% of the deals were legit and only 5% were scams, which he admitted in an interview with London Real in 2019. At Stratton Oakmont, they focused on making money at all costs. And in the movie, they specifically said, let's go rip some people off. However, Belfort said that never happened in real life and would never happen on Wall Street. The fact that people would get scammed was kind of unspoken, and no one would ever say that. Belfort claimed that in the movie, the drug use was significantly worse than the movie actually portrayed. However, him and his partners did not use drugs at work until the last few years when Stratton Oakmont was under investigation by the FBI and they were really starting to go under. And that was due to a lot of stress causing them to just start using drugs at work. And then Belfort said the biggest inaccuracy in the movie was that there was a scene in which he stood on a stage in front of everybody at Stratton Oakmont and said, "I'm not leaving," in response to a deal that the FBI had given him to leave Stratton Oakmont, serve less time in prison, just overall get a lesser punishment. But Belfort instead, in the movie, said, "I'm not leaving," stayed at the company, and then had a very bad downfall. In real life, Belfort said he took the deal, and that scene where he left, where he said, "I'm not leaving," never happened. And instead, he ran the company from behind the scenes through his friend Danny, referred to as Donnie in the movie. And so that's how he stayed involved with Stratton Oakmont. However, that scene never happened.
So, a brief history of pump and dump schemes in the United States. There were four other major pump and dump schemes in Wall Street history, the first one occurring in the late 1920s with the RCA and the radio pool. There was also the ZZZZ Bus Incorporated in 1986, Centennial Technologies in 1994, and Satium Computer Services in 2008. We can see in this chart that the typical rise and fall of pump and dump schemes where they have a fairly consistent rise, or the pump, and a very quick downfall, which is the dump. Stratton Oakmont was founded in the late 1980s and thrived from 1990 to 1997, where they eventually met their downfall after being banned from the brokerage industry in 1996. The two founders, Jordan Belfort and Danny Porsche, were arrested in 1998 for money laundering and securities fraud, serving 22 months, and corrupt dealing, serving 39 months, respectively.
So, a main proponent that we looked at the film with was Friedman's stakeholder theory, which is a challenger to Friedman's stockholder theory. The main idea is that a manager has a fiduciary relationship to stockholders rather than maintaining duty, has a fiduciary relationship to stakeholders rather than maintaining a duty solely to stockholders. Fiduciary relationship meaning that they look out for those who have stake in the company rather than themselves. The theory states that stakeholders have a right to not be treated solely as a means to an end, which is an aspect of Kantian ethics that is included here. And the theory also states that stakeholders can be harmed due to having their rights violated by corporate actions. So it represents consequentialism as well. The theory, the definition of stakeholders has two definitions. The narrow definition being those who are vital to a corporation's success, and the wide definition is those who are affected by the corporation. Now, there are two main arguments for stakeholder theory, one of them being an economic argument. So the first claim for this argument is that real-life circumstances, such as moral hazards, dictates stakeholders having a say in the direction of a corporation. The second claim is that the invisible hand doctrine is prevented from influencing society because of real-life circumstances. And therefore, managers should look out for stakeholders. So what this is saying is that the definition of a free market democracy in theory and in practice are very different. Some of these differences do include moral hazards, and in the case of the movie, it's harming those who are buying stock through Stratton Oakmont. Because these differences occur, we can't necessarily pursue our own economic good, which is why a manager should help facilitate this if possible. The legal argument for stakeholder theory is as follows. So the first claim is that stakeholders are recognized as legal entities and have rights in a court of law. The second claim is that if an entity has legal rights, then it should have moral status within a corporation. The third claim is that managers are obligated to respect the rights of the morally relevant, and therefore managers of a corporation should look out for the interests of all corporate stakeholders. So by participating in pump and dump schemes, Stratton Oakmont actively goes against stakeholder theory. So Stratton Oakmont violates the idea of stakeholders being treated as more than just a means to an end. So despite Jacob pointing out that only 5% of the company's stock deals may have been illegal and then other 95% were legally fine, those last 5% had their rights violated in this aspect. And they do not give moral status to the stakeholders or the people that they're selling stock to, which in turn means that Jordan Belfort does not respect the rights of the morally relevant. And this all wraps up into going against the fiduciary relationship that managers are supposed to have with stakeholders, because Jordan is not looking out for those who have stake in the corporation. So that was from a legal aspect. In an economic aspect, a real life circumstance that is presented in this film is the moral hazard. And in this case, it's the harming of the people that are buying stock through Stratton Oakmont. This company does not give a voice to the people that are buying stock through them, and Jordan Belfort is not looking out for stakeholders and is not helping the people who purchase stock through his company achieve their own economic good.
A secondary central idea focusing on how Belfort and Stratton Oakmont in the movie The Wolf is the Wall Street failed ethically would be how they violated democracy in corporate America, which is an excerpt that was given to us in this class written by John G. Bogle. And it opens with a quote from James Madison saying, "If men were angels, no government intervention would be necessary." And that quote kind of ties into financial engineering, which says a method that corporate managers use to get the most money out of something, which isn't illegal. And Belfort and Stratton Oakmont, as well as some of the partners like Donnie Porish, they really failed to do financial engineering because of all the illegal practices they used. They did what they could to get the most money out of something, but they continuously used illegal practices. And that ties into what James Madison said, because Belfort and Stratton Oakmont, they were far from angels. And this is why government intervention through the SEC and the FBI was necessary. Now, Belfort focused on owner capitalism, which was presented in the reading from Vogel, which is based on a dedication to serving the interests of the corporation's owners by maximizing their return on their investment capital. And Belfort and his partners, they increased their return on their capital that substantially. They just continued to make more and more profit, but they failed to do so legally. And that's where the government intervention from the SEC and the FBI came in. And they failed democracy in corporate America. I think Vogle's argument would be significantly strengthened by putting an excerpt from The Wolf of Wall Street, whether the book or the movie, in, because Belfort is a real life example of how democracy in corporate America can fail and why government intervention is necessary. And it's also a pop culture reference because a lot of people know the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. The Wolf of Wall Street also ties into utilitarianism, because utilitarianism calls on us as ethical people to increase human happiness and decrease human suffering. And Belfort and Stratton Oakmont continue to focus on increasing their happiness by gaining money and living lavishly through parties, drugs, and everything else. And they failed to decrease human suffering, because as they committed their pump and dump scheme, they were increasing their happiness, but decreasing the happiness of everyone that was investing. Well, in the movie, it showed it as everyone. However, in real life, it was just 5%. And this is an idea that was promoted by philosophers David Hume, Jeremy Bentham, and John Stuart Mill. And objections to utilitarianism include that it is hard to calculate possible consequences of our actions. However, in this movie, it is very easy for Belfort and Stratton Oakmont to calculate their consequences of their actions, because it's very obvious that they're ripping people off and just increasing their money. Because there's a couple of scenes, and I think it happens twice, where Belfort is explaining what they did to make all their money, and he's starting to get into how they rip people off, but he cuts himself off and just says, well, we made X amount of money, and it was a significant number. And then they just go into a party and they're celebrating. So Belfort and Stratton Oakmont failed utilitarianism.
To conclude, the movie highlighted the worst 5% of the activities that actually happened at Stratton Oakmont. The founding partners were all caught and they got what they deserved. Stakeholder theory was violated because the managers and partners were not looking out for their stakeholders when in fact they actually harmed them. And utilitarianism was also violated because they did not increase human happiness and decrease suffrage, but instead did the opposite. And here is a list of our references.